I'm the Director of Entertainment Channels at Sky, and it's my absolute pleasure to introduce today Michael Lombardo, President of HBO Programming, to the 2014 Worldview address. Mike is one of those people in TV that you dream of working with. He's brilliant, he's obsessive, he's charming, he's totally mischievous. And despite being arguably one of the most influential tastemakers in TV in the US, and potentially across the globe, with HBO's reach of 114 million homes, he's also modest and at times incredibly silly. With such influence, thank God he has amazing taste. After joining HBO in the 80s to run business affairs, production and programming operations, he was promoted to President HBO Programming in 2007. And during his tenure, he's launched some of the most acclaimed and successful series that reads like a roll call of some of the best TV of our generation. They include Boardwalk Empire, True Detective, Game of Thrones, The Newsroom, Veep, Silicon Valley, True Blood, Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, Mildred Pierce, Generation Kill, Looking, Girls, Behind the Candelabra, The Normal Heart, and Eastbound and Down. He's also shepherded Cinemax's first foray into primetime commissions, including Strike Back, Banshee, and The Nick, which airs on Sky Atlantic this autumn. So please join me in welcoming Mike Lombardo.
Thank you. Hello.
Hello.
Nice to be in sunny Edinburgh.
It's always sunny like this. Is this your first time in Edinburgh?
It is my first time in Scotland.
And have you been to any of the festivals so far this year?
I've not. This is, unfortunately, I squeeze this into one day. I have, in the States, we have the fun-filled Emmy weekend coming ahead this coming weekend. So
you actually got 99 Emmy nominations this year?
We did.
Pretty unbelievable.
Very happy. Yes.
And is that a record for HBO or a small year?
I think we've topped it before, but you know, it's no surprise that the world, particularly in the US, the number of new quality shows just increases every year. So every year we sort of hold our breath and go, 99 in this environment was as thrilling, and we couldn't be happier.
Will there be a year, is there a figure below which you get quite depressed? Is it like 90?
You know, I asked myself that. I was like, what should I anticipate? And I'm fearful of even thinking of a number, because there will be a year I wake up and I have 15 nominations, and I have to be happy with that. And you know, so there isn't. But look, it's a quality problem. We're happy this year, and now it's about worrying about the next year.
So we're going to see a tape in a second. How's HBO going? That's sort of a silly question when you've just had 99 Emmy nominations.
No, but I think Emmys is just one. I mean, the Emmys is really just one indicator. I think viewership is up for us in prime time, original programming, and even the theatricals. Our revenue is up. Subscriber levels are up, and we had subscriber growth in the last year that we hadn't seen in the previous 5 years. So things are good. Things are good. You know, I think I won't make a Fox joke at this point, but things are good.
Do you think at the end of any of the 8 years you've been in the job, do you have a sense of whether you're at the creative peak or where you are in the cycle, or when have been your particular?
You know, well, you have this. It's hard, Stuart, to ever feel like you've hit a moment. You know what I mean? You're always so worried and focused about the next show, the next year, that it's hard to ever sit for a moment and go, oh, things are pretty good right now. You know, there was a moment this past year where Game of Thrones had unbelievable numbers for us. True Detective not only had premiered to this critical, but also viewing level, amazing, you know, cumed, you know, over 10 million viewers, and it's a very dense show. And then Silicon Valley premiered to unbelievable reviews for us, and people were going, "My God, you guys are killing it!" And I thought, we are? And you know, I think it's all these jobs. Unfortunately, you're always worrying about the next year. So no, I don't think we've achieved any kind of pinnacle. And I think the fear is when you start thinking that is when things turn to shit, quite honestly. So I try not to do that.
Okay, cool. Should we see a tape of some of the things you've done? Cool, what a tape.
Thank you.
So one of the things that jumps out, obviously, is the level of talent there. Talk to us about how HBO deals with talent and gets that talent in, and how you push world-class talent. And
you know, I think it's funny. There's a lot going on in the U.S. I don't know if it's happening in the U.K. where people are packaging shows with performers attached, and you know, my feeling has been, and I just believe it's true, that you start with great scripts. You know, if you have a great script and great writing, you're going to get a great director and you're going to get great talent. I mean, ultimately, good actors want to do great parts. And so, you know, and I think, you know, the other thing I've learned is, you know, name value is great, and it will get people to the first episode. But at the end of the day, a viewer, you know, they're not going to stay because it's Matthew McConaughey. They're not going to stay watching because you have Anthony Hopkins in the lead. And so it's as important to get a great actor as it is to, I mean, everyone wants people to watch, to come into the initial episode, but I think the most important thing is great talent as opposed to name talent. You know, I think television audiences in particular love discovering new talent. Jim Gandolfini was our, you know, quintessential HBO star, and he was unknown before Sopranos.
But it must be almost like a drug that you need to wean yourself off when you've had a year of Julia Roberts, Matthew McConaughey.
You know, you do, you know, the other, it's not just on-screen talent. You know, I think something we've experienced as well, which is as the feature film business, studio business in the States has really morphed into something else. It's become, you know, much more of a, you know, focus on international sales, much more event-driven, much more focused on a young male demo. You know, the serious writers, and not serious, but writers, filmmakers, actors who are interested in what I'll call serious adult fare are increasingly looking to television, increasingly looking to HBO as a possible place to do their work. And initially you're like, oh my God, look at this writer. He's written the Academy Awards, and you can get, you know, it's something we all have to struggle with because you can get seduced and attracted by trophies and names and credits, and then you miss out on Alina Dunham.
When an Academy Award-winning writer, his agent or her agent phone you, and they come in for a meeting, do you have that kind of butterflies feeling, and you think, oh my God?
Well, there's always, you know, you always feel like there's going to be somebody who comes in a room that just starts a conversation that you really just can't keep up with. But I think I've been doing this long enough. There are a few people that I have, you know, when Tom Stoppard came in, I certainly felt a little inadequate. But, you know, by and large, look, I think people are coming, they're selling, they're being vulnerable in that room. So it's hard to feel too, I'm more concerned in making them feel comfortable in the room, because I think, you know, the thing you learn is, I don't care what credentials a writer or director has, they're worried about their next film, their next work. It's hard to get in. I mean, you know, I'm glad I'm not a seller. I like doing what I do, but, you know, watching people come in and pitch and put themselves out there, you know, you have to be sensitive to how vulnerable that is. So I'm sure if I met them at a dinner party, it'd be different, but in the confines of my room, it's generally been pretty comfortable.
Have there been any series directly in the room during a pitch that you've just gone for?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, True Detective was something I went for.
Tell us about True Detective. How did that work? It was a pre-packaged thing, wasn't it?
Yeah. We had worked with Nick before. You know, he is a young, he's not young, but he came to Hollywood sort of in midlife. He had worked in academia, and we hired him to do a pilot script. We decided not to go forward with it, but the writing was unbelievable.
Is this bull riding script that he's talked about?
Yes, it's an exceptional writing. So we got a call saying, Nick's written 2 episodes, and we're bringing it in attached with possibilities 2 stars and Cary Fukunaga to direct, and they gave us the first 2 scripts. And
you went home to read them?
Went home to read them, and I knew in the room that we had to do this. I think the leap for us generally, and this is, is we would want to do a first episode, want to spend some time talking about it, but it was clear that they had packaged it and it was competitive, and so it required a bigger leap by us. But honestly, the writing was too exceptional.
And did you say in the room, I just
want to do this. We want to do this. And
what was his response?
Great. Well, it was clear that it became competitive right away, and I do think our experience with Nick helped us get that, because it wasn't about, it was great that Matthew and Woody were attached, but that was before Matthew had become Matthew McConaughey. It was prior to his sort of emergence as the sort of well-respected actor that he is today. We responded to the writing, and what Nick pitched wasn't 1 season. He came in and said, I want to do a series. I want to come back every year. And he knew, and we knew that, this is a long-term commitment. This isn't about, and he wasn't looking for someone to just be attracted by the sexy casting. And this has happened before to us. People come in and pitch names and go, so-and-so and so-and-so is interested in being in it. I don't know, there were no deals done. There were, so you go, okay, well, maybe. But what was undeniable was the writing. And we went for it.
And is it right that one of the actors was going to play the other character's role?
Well, I don't know if they were going to play the other character. I thought they were going to play the other character. So, I just assumed, based on their prior work, that Woody was going to play Cole. And walked out of the room, and at some point someone said, no. Matthew's playing Cole. And I'm like, can he do it? Can he really? This is before I had obviously seen Dallas Buyers Club, and I was like, Matthew McConaughey, really? And, but obviously, if you've seen it, he's unbelievable, he's undeniable, and Woody was unbelievable playing his role. So yes, it was, I don't know if they were really thinking, it was certainly in my head for a while when I bought it. But again, it just shows, yes, it was great, those names as a reference point, but we're total, suckers for good writing. That's what we are.
Should we see a clip of True Detective?
Sure.
If people haven't seen it, it's the most extraordinary piece of TV. So there's lots of buzz about the second series. I'm obviously going to have to ask you about the second series. So it's based in Ipswich in England, is that right?
Exactly. Small town.
Small town.
Small murder. No. We're going to start shooting in September. We're shooting for it to be on the air next summer.
Different characters?
Different characters, I think, different setting.
Where is it set? California?
It's set in California, in all of California, I should say. And I think I have to, my...
2 cops?
There are 3 cops. I think that's probably all I'm allowed to say. I think we're in negotiations. We'll probably be announcing the casting soon. I can say this. I've read the first 2 hours and outlines for 2 subsequent episodes. I think, when you have a success like True Detective, I think less for us, honestly, than for someone like Nick, it's challenging. How do you face the page again, and start afresh and not be haunted by the success of the show you just done?
One of the characters is female, is that right?
One of the characters is female. I think the writing is it's better than last season. It is exceptional, and I think...
is it as dark as the previous series? Because it had really dark elements.
I think Nick's always going to write with a certain he explores the darkness in people's souls. He just does. That's what interests him. There's it's not, when you say as dark, I don't think it's as dark, but it's not a light ride. He's Nick, and I think the beauty of True Detective and what attracted us to True Detective, we didn't need to do a crime show. Yeah. Doing a police drama, I mean, they've been done ad nauseum in U.S. television. I think he's less interested in a police drama or a detective genre than using it as a format to explore the psychology of certain people. And Nick likes looking into the crevices of the soul, and so there are some dark things in it.
It's a different director.
It's a different director. I think this season, unlike the former, instead of one director for the entirety, we're going to have break it up and have 3 or 4 directors, and we'll also be announcing the director for the first batch of episodes, hopefully soon as well.
So creative risk is a really big thing that you and Richard and the rest of the team feel passionately about. It's interesting, isn't it? Like, at what point is a creative risk that didn't pay off a mistake? Yeah. And we've all had them. Yeah. Some of us more than others, mistakes. And you retrospectively try and think, well, it was a risk, or this is what good thing I took out of it. How do you talk about risk?
Look, I think, first of all, HBO, we're not ad supported. We don't sell tickets. So there's it's a culture, it's a company that, we don't approach programming with the same sort of, it's not fear-based at all. Mm-hmm. If a show doesn't get the numbers we hope, no one's going to lose their job. It's not going to change the revenue, really. We don't project, we don't monetize every show.
Do you have an expectation of ratings?
Well, we try not to. Okay. Because again, I'm not looking. I don't look at True Detective and say, well, I need to get X in advertising dollars to make sense of it. I get a monthly fee as long as I'm hitting my budget, and we're selling subscriptions. I don't need to cost justify every show, which gives you enormous freedom to take risks. At the same time, I think taking risks, is hard. It's hard. What happens sometimes is you think you're taking a risk, and what you're really doing is buying into some perceptions about why you think it'll succeed. And that's when we failed. Is whenever I try to think, and I won't even admit it to myself, what will be a hit, is when I have, I think, made mistakes. I think what has worked for us the best is, and it's what we try to stay true to, is just respond to the writing. Just stay focused on the writing. Don't ask yourself whether anybody's going to be interested in watching A Dark Descent into Hell. Don't ask, if it's good, someone's going to find it. And it's really freaking hard to do that because we all care about success and about people watching our shows and about critics loving them. And at the same time, the minute you start programming, thinking about that, you're fucked.
So how do you have, I totally buy that, but how do you have a failure then at HBO?
I don't want to name shows, but there are shows where I go, you know what? We packaged this with a lot of stars and big sexy filmmaker and with a big idea, but you know what? We went into production and the script wasn't ready. Right. And I didn't push hard enough to get the script. Because if the story's not there, it's not going to work. I don't care what the production value is. I don't care what stars you have attached to it. And so, I don't want to name shows, but I look at shows in retrospect, they go, God, you did it once again. And look, on True Detective, it was scary, not because of Nick. What was scary about True Detective, once we stepped in, they said, well, Woody Harrelson has to be available for Hunger Games 2, and he has an out date, I forget when it was. So it meant that Nick had to write 6 episodes in the most truncated period. And that to me is terrifying, you know, because the one thing you want to do is get the writing right. If you, and so, you know, it was, that was scary. And I think we pulled it off. I think he pulled it off. But, you know, fortunately this season he's gotten some more time to crack the stories and not work with that same stick over his head. But, yeah.
Your development process is sort of legendary. So in the sense that...
good or bad? I don't...
No, good. I think in TV, in Britain, people will criticise a development period. If it takes 2 years, they'll be like, oh, they didn't call me back for 2 years.
Right.
Somehow, HBO have turned that round, so you can develop something for 7 years until it's ready.
Well, you know, I think if it's 7 years, it's probably... But, you know, I think that's twofold. One is when we do a deal with a writer, we don't insist on a schedule.
Right.
You know, like I think most networks, you know, give dates, they want us draft. We don't do that. Sometimes to our failing, you know, because there'll be times where we're sitting there going, where's that script? Yeah. You know, and so what happens is writers are juggling. They're doing a film, so sometimes the elapse of time is just a function of a writer's schedule.
Don't you fall out of love with the project, though?
Well, you fall out of love, you get other things. I mean, I've been pitched something recently and very close to something that, I don't know how to say it for this room, that David Chase has started working on 7 years ago. And I check in with him and he's still working on it and I'm gonna wait for that. But, you know, I need to check in every once in a while. David, is this still the, you know, we're still doing this, right? So, so that's, and you do sort of move on, but that's the risk you take. But sometimes, and there are times where a script comes in, you know, really quickly. If it's something that we're aware feels like something we need sooner rather than later, we'll tell it to a writer. I think if the reason a script process takes too long is because you're still rejiggering it, I think that's probably, you know, there comes a moment, and I think it's hard for us to know when that moment comes because we don't have seasons and we don't have dates to go, let's stop. You know, I think things that take that much work probably are not meant to happen right then. And it's hard to know that because you become emotionally invested in what that show can be. You become emotionally invested with the writer. It's a drag saying no.
American networks seen as sort of quite brutal, I suppose, in that they go for lots and lots of scripts, and you know it's some kind of mathematical formula. Just at a practical level, how many scripts do you develop per series that's delivered?
You know, we don't ever think in those terms.
Really?
I think we're generally aware of saying no is not a good thing. I mean, who, you know, want the experience with a writer to be a positive one, so we only develop things that we really believe.
So how many do you have in development now?
I think there's probably, again, right now our ratio is probably as bad as it's ever been in the sense of the number of scripts to production. It's probably close to 7 to 1, 7 scripts for every pilot we do. And in terms of pilot to series, I would say it's, and I hate to say this because people who have pilots that don't go forward will feel badly, but we almost very rarely don't go forward after a pilot stage, although it's happened.
So you don't have that many scripts in development then? It sounds like it's 60, 70-ish?
Yeah, that's probably right.
And when you're searching for new talent, like Lena Dunham, you know, one of the things that strikes me is your diary must be a nightmare because you never want to say no to the possibility.
I mean, that's something I think that, you know, we've learned the hard way as a company,
Tell us about Lena Dunham and maybe...
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think going before Lena, I'll just, you know... you know, you and I have talked about this. There was a period when Richard and I first got our jobs, about 8 years ago. Richard's moved on now to be CEO, where we sat down with the development team, and there was almost nothing in development. Very little. And I think there had developed a kind of shorthand within HBO Creative that they knew by writers' prior work, whether it was an HBO show or not. And that formula, that definition got smaller and smaller and smaller. And I think what you end up doing then is making production choices on a very limited, your whole viewpoint about what's special gets skewed. And so it was an untenable situation for us, and we realized we needed to open our eyes, our ears, and literally our doors. Because the truth of the matter is, HBO started by, original programming sort of got its first big burst with David Chase, who, had been working in network television land, had one show kind of successful, but literally on his resume would have been the kind of writer that people now wouldn't have taken a meeting from. And that just was not going to, so we made, and what that means is not saying no to a meeting, reading a script. And so, I think we also knew, there are writers out there that aren't coming through the system. To get an agent now, you have to have produced quotes. I mean, it's almost impossible in the States to get an agent or a manager. And so how do you reach those people that are diverse voices, whether it's women, whether it's diversity of color, that are not young, or just youth and inexperience that are not coming to us. So we scour film festivals. Someone went to South by Southwest, saw Tiny Furniture, which is a film she had self-produced, brought it back and said, watch this. And we watched it, and it was it was just undeniable that this was a young woman with a very specific voice. And
she must have gone nuts when you phoned her.
I think she was totally out of her. She may have said, "What's HBO?" No, she didn't. But and it led to Girls. And I think it's that sort of just continually being open to not knowing where the next great script is going to come from, which is a challenge, because at the same time you want to pay attention when Eric Roth comes in, Academy Award-winning, and has a project, and at the same time you don't want to not have a time for someone who literally has no produced credits. And so what it means is people read a lot and take a lot of meetings. I mean, that my life is, I'd like to say it's all, I literally, my day is start at 10 in the morning, don't start too late, and to 7 at night, and it's meeting after meeting after meeting. And, I think that just comes with the job. It has to. The minute you can tell by, or you think by a resume whether the script is going to be worth it or not, you're
So this year's a really big year for HBO in terms of sort of replenishment.
Yeah.
A couple of series coming to an end: Boardwalk Empire, True Blood, and
Newsroom.
And Newsroom.
Yeah.
How do you go about sort of killing your babies like that?
I think
sorry, does that sound weird?
I think we like to say, at HBO we pride ourselves on we don't focus group, we don't care about ratings, a lot of which is true. And most of which is, but it's hard then to say no to people, or to say, let's bring this to an end, because, a show like True Blood, the ratings, this season, this summer, it's one of the highest rated shows across the board. We're only in a third of U.S. households. It gets over 10 million viewers an episode. I think there comes a moment where the cost of a show go up. And you just start questioning why we continue to air it. The minute we feel like we're airing it for the numbers, we start questioning it. Like every season we sit down with the creator and say, tell us what the next year would be like. And if there's not an exciting, unbelievable, undeniable idea for the coming season, we question whether we treat current shows as sort of aggressively as we treat development. And I think in the case of True Blood, it just felt like we had reached a place where the storytelling was hitting a wall. And to stay just because the ratings were strong just felt like, first of all, not who we are, not what we're promising the consumer. And we needed, quite honestly, the money and the Sunday night space to start making room for new shows, and it just felt like the right moment. And those are hard conversations. I think the same is true for Boardwalk. I think, Terry Winter, unwittingly or wittingly, had written Nucky Johnson's journey as a man into a place where you go, okay, he's ended this season in a total crisis about being a gangster. Where do you go from here? Does he pick back up again? And so it was heartbreaking because I don't think prior to the fourth season we were thinking about ending it in the fifth season, but it just felt like that was the right conversation. And it was, and at the same time we're ending them, and it's a little scary because you know what? It's nice to have shows that deliver numbers, and all of a sudden you're introducing new shows and
when you go home and you're reading the last episode of Boardwalk Empire or True Blood or Newsroom, are you literally saying to friends and family, like, I've got the last episode? And when you finish reading, is it a good ending for Boardwalk Empire, for instance?
Boardwalk Empire is a fantastic, it is, it's a shame, it is as magnificent a season as any they've done. It's interesting, I think knowing they were writing to the end sort of, I don't know, not that it lit a fire, I think it encouraged them to think about all the things they wanted to explore about Nucky that they hadn't, and it's a really emotional, powerful last season. And the same is true of Newsroom. We've had a bit of a dialogue with Aaron about the show and how long to continue it, and
it must be difficult because he's quite a talent.
Well, he is talented, and I think it was a mutual. I think. Look, there's a certain. Aaron is.
Crazy.
No, but he's crazy as a writer in that every word comes through him. And I think he wants to be collaborative, and he, at the same time, as a writer, he knows how to do it. Only every word comes through him, and that, to be responsible for 12 scripts a year, to pick up, and it became enervating, and I think he didn't see necessarily where to go after a certain time. So we talked about, and I think what the decision was, well, let's end this together elegantly for the consumer, for the show, for the actors. So it's a really powerful ending. And again, I think for Aaron, knowing that he was, okay, I see the end, I have something to write to now. It energized the storytelling, I think, both emotionally and narratively. So, cool. And I'll tell you, it gets a little sad to say goodbye to shows and people, because this becomes, HBO is not just a network. We produce our shows, so these are people I work with, I talk to every day, and
I know this will be a difficult thing to ask, because you might not want to talk about it, but are there areas, we're not going to talk about Game of Thrones now, because there's a 5 o'clock session today on Game of Thrones, but no one would have seen that you were going to go in that direction. Yeah. It's a thing I sort of have to ask. Are there directions you're going to take HBO in the light of these 3 shows ending that will shock us all, or can you give us some hints?
Again, I honestly, I think, and I wish we were more, sometimes I wish we were more strategic, and sometimes we try to be, and we sit down and we go, okay, what should we be looking for? Well, the drama area, and at the end of the day, honestly, Stuart, because we want to, and sometimes we're wrong, and sometimes we miss, but we really are betting on quality. We say that, and then something walks in the door, and God damn it, it's another vampire show, and you're going to go, but it's so good.
Yeah.
I think the truth is, the least successful pitch meeting I have is when someone comes in and goes, okay, what are you looking for? And I go, forget, this is not.
Bye.
What we're about is someone coming in and saying, okay, here's the show I've been dying to do my whole life. That's the meeting I want. So it's great when something goes, wow, but we're reactive in that sense. And every once in a while we try to be more proactive. Like, what do you think about, it's not been the most successful journey for us.
One of the areas people won't have expected you to go into, I guess, is the Nick.
Yeah.
So Cinemax, you've transformed it, Strike Back and Banshee, quite visceral pieces. Tell us about The Nick, and then we'll see it.
The Nick is an interesting, Cinemax hadn't had original programming until a few years ago. And we looked around and we said, we're the only pay service in the States without branded content, so we needed to change that. Did our first with Sky, Strike Back, and I think we looked at what the viewership was there on the films and realized, okay, we're going to skew the original programming more sort of male action, Strike Back, Banshee, and then Steven Soderbergh came in, and we met Steven through Behind the Candelabra,
which was so incredible. If anyone else saw it, it's brilliant.
He's a delight to work with, enormously talented man. And he came in and said, okay, I have a script, I have an actor, I want to direct all 10 of these, here it is. And it was a pilot for The Nick, and I want to go into production, 2 months. And reading it, Clive Owen is undeniable. Steven Soderbergh's undeniable. The script was undeniable. And he said, and what about that service, Cinemax? I said, Cinemax, really? He said, well, and you'll see, it's not clearly in the wheelhouse of what we would have pitched as Cinemax. And I think at the same time, we said, well, and Steven, I think being a sort of iconoclast, sort of liked the idea of helping being part of sort of growing a brand. Everyone else does HBO. I'm going to do Cinemax. And so I think we scratched our head for a second and said, well, this isn't really exactly, this is the first show on Cinemax that could absolutely work on HBO, which was sort of not our plan going forward. But, I think we have to sort of let that network grow organically in the way it grows. And we needed a show on the air this year on Cinemax. And we said, let's do this. So
before we see a clip, tell us about Cinemax, because people won't.
Cinemax, is
sorry, tell us about The Nick.
The Nick is set at turn of the century, 19th, 20th century, New York City. The Nick's short for the Knickerbocker Hospital. It's a hospital drama, but really about the birth of modern medicine and the pioneers of it. It's a very visceral show. I don't know what the clip will show in terms of its exploration of doctors as scientists, exploring the new tools that science allowed them to play with on human beings for medical purposes. And also it's a view of microcosm of turn of the century society. And Clive Owen does an amazing job playing a coke-fueled surgeon.
So if you haven't eaten,
if you haven't, this is not for the faint part. It's
beautiful, but it's quite strong.
Beautifully done.
Yeah. So that was tamer than lots of the.
Very tame.
Yeah.
An edited clip for this audience. It's premiered in the United States. It's doing really well for Cinemax, and we've already ordered a second season. It's unusual, but Steven Soderbergh directed every frame of the first 10 episodes. He edited every frame. He shot every frame. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah.
We run it in a few months. So, as this is a Worldview, I'd love to get your sense on taste and decency. So you're a dad.
Sure.
Yeah. You've got kiddies. You're bringing them into this world, and you show them filth like this. Do you feel a kind of moral responsibility, or where does creative endeavour? How much incest can you have in a show?
Exactly. It's an interesting. My kids are always. I have young kids. They're coming in when I'm screening stuff. Can I watch this, Dad? And I'm like, no, you can. And as I realize, there's very little on HBO that they can watch. And so, but I think number one, when we sort of marked out who we were, we're an adult service. By adult, I don't mean pornographic, and I don't mean pushing the boundaries unnecessarily for sex or violence, but I think not worrying about commercial advertising and appealing to the largest common denominator. But I think we struggle with it. I think the truth is, if it's organic to the storytelling, if it feels, and at the end of the day, it's a bet on doing business with the right creators that care as much about the integrity of their shows as we do. I think but yeah, I'll give you an example. On the first season of Girls,
oh my God, there's so much in the first season.
Even talking about it, but there was a scene where Adam Driver ejaculates, and it was like a 30-second scene, and I'm like, Lena, I don't think we need to see that much. And we had a very, she's a very smart, self-confident woman, and she was only 22 at that moment. We had a very passionate disagreement, but respectful about what was necessary and not necessary for the storytelling. I think she cut it back a lot, because ultimately what I didn't want was for a show that a woman couldn't comfortably watch with a 16-year-old daughter. At the same time, I don't want Lena to ever feel like she can't tell the story she doesn't want to say. So at the end of the day, honestly, Stuart, if Lena had said to me, well, look, this is just how I see it, and I can't see it any other way, I probably would have let her do what she believed strongly. Our view is, we don't have standards and practices. We don't come in as a censor, but I do come in once in a while and just question the need for pushing the envelope. And I think it's easy sometimes to stay on a scene longer than you need to stay on for purposes of establishing what you need to for the viewer. And there are times where, and I think honestly, I think we've been pretty good about it. I think we're lucky that I work with responsible writers. I still think going forward, what would a family-friendly HBO show be like? I don't know. But honestly, I'd love to figure that out. We tried once to do what I'd call an 8 o'clock show, a show that had no nudity, no sex, no profanity, no morally ambiguous characters, and nobody watched it.
What was it called?
First Lady's Detectives Club.
Oh, yeah.
And so, again, that could have been for a host of reasons other than that. But I think, look, having a family, I'd love a show that a family could sit down and watch. Those are hard to do and still have a voice and be smart and, dare I say, groundbreaking in some way. But I'm determined to do it.
Before we open up for questions, what TV do you watch other than HBO TV?
Well,
who do you admire in the industry? What channels and stuff do you watch?
Given my job, I don't watch a lot of scripted television just because of time. So when I am watching television, I tend to watch the most sophomoric, mindless television like The Bachelorette or, or Survivor, just because it's mindless and I can tune in and out. But,
Please bring The Bachelor to HBO.
There you go.
Just group sex, murder.
I was a huge fan of and I'm a huge fan of Breaking Bad and Vince Gilligan. I watched that religiously.
Are you doing any stuff with him?
Well, I hope to. He has a very big deal at Sony Television. I think it's complicated for studios to do business with us, I'll be honest with you. I think we've just figured out recently how to do business with Warner Brothers. We did a pilot with Fox. We haven't done something with Sony yet. I think there is,
why is it difficult? Not just business terms, you mean culture and...
Well, two things. Number one, we have a history of producing ourselves, selling internationally, and they value the international rights much less than we've attributed value to. So the amount of money they're willing to deficit on a show has never really made sense to us for what we know the value of the rights to be. And I think, in the US at least, it's very important for us to we do not sell our shows to free television. We do, we made a very small deal recently with Amazon, but prior to that, all of our shows were on HBO Go. We're on our digital platform. And so a lot of studios, whoa, I want to sell it to Netflix. Well, part of our vision is, as an HBO subscriber, you get not only the linear feed, but you get our digital feed. And on there, we promise you're going to get everything HBO's ever made. And I think going forward, HBO Go becomes more and more important to us. We're not monetizing HBO Go right now. I'm not getting money for it. So it's hard to value that to the studio. So it's become a source of contention because they see it as an area where they would otherwise derive revenue that we're holding. So long story short, I hope we do some business with Vince. I'm going to guess they think selling to NBC will pay off their investment, but I imagine Vince will do what Vince wants to do. So I'm hoping we can work with him. I'd love that.
Excellent. So anyone got any questions? Go for it.
Hi.
I think there's just at the front here, there's a microphone coming. If you just stare at one another in silence until it gets in.
Hi. Good afternoon. My name's Julie Craig. I run one of the screen commissions in the UK called T-Screen. I've listened with great interest to the way that you make your decisions. I'm just wondering, to what extent do the money guys come into play of, well, we can go here or there for the tax breaks, or any other money true implication, for example?
Well, this job, I guess I'm as much a money guy as a creative guy because, and you have to be now. The truth of the matter is, I have a finite budget. The bad side of being I'm not forced to monetize every show. The bad side of that is I have a set budget every year. This is what
Can you say what your budget is, or is it commercially?
It's large. No, we tend, but
is it American large or British large?
It's American large.
What, is it like $1 billion?
It's
over $1 billion.
No, it's close.
I'm really trying my
when we have shows now, particularly shows with production value, period, the first question is, where can we shoot this? And I think, the UK has now become a very attractive place to shoot shows. New York is a very attractive place to shoot. We shoot very little in Los Angeles. We get pitched a show in Los Angeles, you're like, damn. There's not a tax break there. And, True Detective, the first season we shot in Louisiana, even though it had been written for Arkansas, because there was a really attractive tax break in Louisiana. This season's California, and it's California, and it's going to cost us something. So, look, and there's no place else we can set this season. But where a show is movable, we have that conversation, and it's significant dollars now. So, look, I would never shoot a show where it just changed the integrity of the storytelling, or the creator wasn't happy. I wouldn't do that. Not something we would ever insist. And there are compromises. You decide to shoot a show in Louisiana, you're going to get a different level of cast long term than if you're shooting in LA or New York. Although that's changing because I think so many shows shoot out of major cities now. But yeah, something where we think about on every show. I want to stretch our dollars as far as I can.
Anyone else? Back corner there.
Hey, Peter White from Broadcast Magazine. You both did a deal, I think it was earlier this year, to work together on projects in the future. And I just wondered if you could sort of talk between, what that might be, or sort of what the ambition of working with a partner like Sky is, and in the future.
Well, I'll tell you, our general...
Why was there a giggle then, by the way?
I'll tell you what my thinking is about co-productions and about working with Sky. I think, we have a history of having had co-productions most successfully with the BBC. Some of that was driven by financial concerns, but most of it was just a happenstance. The BBC had something, and we felt there was a time where we felt that they were in sync with us in terms of pushing for quality. You know, what we're really not interested in is partners just for the sake of sharing expenses, where there's just going to be a multitude of notes given to the writer, because ultimately we're betting on a voice. So the last thing we want is to have that voice diluted. I think our experience with Stuart and his team has led us to a place where I think we are actively looking for projects to do with them. I think it's less about, honestly, about costs than the excitement of working together, particularly with talent that they know that we're not aware of, or vice versa. I think financially it probably makes sense, but I think the bigger attraction is, you know, when 1 + 1 can equal 3 creatively. And I think it means that you have to just be on the same wavelength in terms of what you're looking for. You know, most other networks are in the business of maximizing viewership. And not that I don't want viewership, but if you develop thinking about the biggest number of people watching, the product is just going to be very different than if what you think about is making the best version of that product. It's just going to be different. And that's somebody else's business. My business is hone in on the voice, on the quality, not worry about how many people turn up. And I'm not saying that's Stuart's business, but I think he gets that. And I think that his team gets that. And I think they care about, I think, you know, Sky, like HBO, is in the business of a branded content. I want HBO to stand for something. You may not like the show, but that we're offering, but at least I expect that you respect and understand why we made it.
I think we've got time. From my point of view, I think it's all about who you work with and kind of being culturally aligned. So
yeah, I agree.
We've got time for one more question. Who to pick? You, as I know you, I can suffer the repercussions.
Hello, Chiara Codeca, Delos Books. I'm an Italian journalist. I was wondering, you said before about foreign markets. And could you tell us a bit more about how much the possibility of revenues from foreign markets inform your decision when you decide to go on? Sorry, okay.
Yeah, look, I mean, I wish, again, I think, just like I don't care about viewers, I mean, and this is, you know, I was just chatting with, and not that I don't care about, I care tremendously, but I do believe the minute you start worrying about the number of viewers, the minute you're going to dumb it down. And that's just not, our experience has been, if it's good, you will get an audience. And I'd rather bet on that than, but, you know, Stuart was just telling me that True Detective did really well here, and that surprises me. You know, it's not built, certainly for a foreign audience, really not built for, it's a dense, challenging show that you need to pay attention to. You cannot be on your iPhone while you will miss, you know, and it did well for us in the States, but I thought, okay, but to hear that it does well internationally is a surprise to me and great news, because I do think the truth is, if it's really good, it will do well. There are shows, even when Game of Thrones came in, people said, well, obviously, I was like, no, I mean, just not how we're wired at HBO, much to the, I think, and we've done well following that mandate, which is just make sure it's good.
I think that seems a great place to end it. So I just want to thank Northern Ireland Screen for sponsoring this session.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Thank you, Northern Ireland Screen.
At 5 o'clock today in the Pentland is the Game of Thrones session, where Mike will be chatting with some of the guys from Game of Thrones about how that came about. Thanks to Anna and HBO, and please join me in thanking Mike.
You made this an absolute pleasure.
No worries.